I'm good, Sean. Good to be with you.
It's good to be with you. You and I had a chance to meet at the, which was great for me to be able to chat with you at the UFO conference in Santa Clara, up in Northern California. Brian Hall's event up there. So it was an honor talking to you there.
Right.
Let's start about some things that are going on, interesting things with you. Now we're going to get to, and I promise we will get to this. You're doing some mortgage defense stuff. You're doing some, you're doing a lot of the things that have to do with helping people with their homes and political things and otherwise. I guess the biggest thing, and you talk a lot about this in your bio, about how you became involved with time travel experiments. Let's get down to it. Can you give me a little bit of the history of the technology of time travel? Because I have this book called Sands of Time, where I wrote a lot about the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia experiment and all that. Let's just say the government has the ability, or whomever I can't just say the government, but whomever this secret cabal of people is, have the technology to travel through time. Where does it come from?
Well, Project Pegasus, which was launched under DARPA, which in those years, of course, was ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is the leading technical development sub-agency of the Defense Department.
Okay.
Essentially can be conceptualized as an intelligence funnel into which they were putting anything and everything that would yield a time travel capability. And that would include everything from information from ancient civilizations to include the Sumerian, the Babylonian, and the Egyptian, foreign technology sources to include the Nazi, German, and Soviet Russian, extraterrestrial sources, both from reverse engineering down saucer technical equipment, and of course the work of leading contemporary physicists and inventors, most especially Nikola Tesla. So all that was being placed in an intelligence funnel under DARPA as the umbrella agency in the mid-'60s. Into that, of course, was placed, which at that point was the 25-year-old data from Tesla. When Tesla died on January 7th of 1943 at the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan, there were 2 FBI agents and 2 War Department officials who were racing to his apartment at the New Yorker Hotel. The War Department officials got there first, and they seized his property under the Alien Property Act. It was held for a short period of time by the National Archives, and then forwarded to the physicists that were then gathering in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to design and test the atomic bomb.
Do you think? Let me just interject something here. Do you think that Tesla actually did die on that day, or do you think that it was? There are a lot of people who talk about maybe it was a double of Tesla, that Tesla was absorbed into some secret programs long before that.
Well, there was a lot of mystique surrounding Tesla because he was basically the progenitor of the technology of the 21st century. I mean, he was quite elderly at that time. He was, I believe, 89 years old.
He was 80. Yeah, he was 86.
86. Okay, so I believe that most likely he died. Now, that was the primary contribution to Project Pegasus, as stated by my late father, Raymond, who was one of the project engineers. My dad was essentially the chief technical consultant between the Ralph M. Parsons Company and the CIA on the theory and practice of Tesla teleportation. Tesla's essential contribution to Project Pegasus was also affirmed by Jack Pruitt, who was one of the team leaders, and Dr. Robert Beckwith, who had just left General Electric and was one of the principal consulting engineers. So with that Tesla contribution, in Pegasus, I was involved in 8 different modalities of time travel, spanning the gap. I mean, the most rudimentary form essentially was conventional remote viewing that we were doing for the Office of Naval Intelligence. Then they began spinning us to induce out-of-body experiences and questioning us about what we saw when we were out of body. Then in spring of 1970, they were placing us on what later came to be known as the Montauk chair, which is a transducer that bumps the human mind forward in time so you can directly experience a future life event, and then when you can come back, you can answer questions about what you saw when you were out of body visiting your future.
Right.
Then we were introduced, we had early on been in my case, by 1967-68, but after I was officially placed in the program in the fall of 1969, the kids in the program were then introduced to Tesla teleportation in summer of 70, to chronovision, which is a way to visit past and future events via hologram, That was by fall of 70. And then we began to be involved in more elaborate forms of bodily teleportation and other forms of physical time travel that the Tesla teleporters allow. We were jumping through devices called stargates, which are basically advanced or very large teleporters. And there were other modalities of physical time travel that came along. So I don't think we should even really speak of it as time travel. I'm using the phrase quantum access because what was emerging then was not just the ability to send somebody to the past or future physically, but also to involve them in something that held much more promise, because we could go back before the existence of the device, which was to send somebody in a physio-virtual way, for example, to the distant past via these devices called chronovisors. Now, that wasn't bodily time travel, but it was a way of basically identifying the signal, the residual signal of a past event or the potential signal of a future event, amplify it, and lens it into the laboratory. So Project Pegasus was, in a sense, more elaborate than time travel. It was an intelligence gathering project where they were experimenting with anything that would give them better data about past and future events so that the executive branch of the U.S. government could engage in better contingency planning for future events.
Now, as I also understand it as well, from my understanding from my book, Sands of Time, when they were at Montauk using this thing called the Beast, that in essence they were using rudimentary time travel techniques, or not time travel, teleportation techniques at that time, which looked to us like something that we'd gotten from the Germans, in order to take, as far as I understand it, pods or satellites, if you will, sensor devices, and teleport them or jump them into the heart of Russian nuclear explosions, so that we could then actually use these devices to study time dilations in the center of atomic weapons. It wasn't until they came up with the idea, here is their challenge, teleporting these devices into the heart of nuclear explosions. They had to supercool the things in order to jump them in, and then, of course, when they came back to the laboratory, they were, of course, hot and radioactive. So they started jumping these things to the moon to supercool them, then into the heart of the nuclear explosion, then back to the moon to cool them off again, and then back into the laboratory. Supposedly, the time dilation effects then began to radically destabilize the minute they started jumping things outside of the morphogenic field of the Earth, and that this was when the time dilation effect then expanded all around Camp Hero at Montauk and into the local communities. And this was somewhere around 1962. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I can affirm that something happened under Project Montauk for two reasons. First is that Jack Pruitt, who Nichols and Moon identified as the research director of Project Montauk,
and this is Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. Peter Moon, a writer of various books, Montauk Project, et cetera, Preston Nichols, a very interesting character. He's going to be at the Awaken Aware conference actually this weekend. Who was also good friends with Al Bielek, and I've known Preston and I knew Al Bielek very well. Go.
I can affirm that Project Montauk existed because my father and I worked with Jack Pruitt. I met Jack Pruitt in the summer after kindergarten, which for me was the summer of 1967. Because he was resolving a criminal incident that had happened on Project Pegasus. And I last met Jack Pruitt in a confidential briefing that he gave me on the medical effects of what I had been through in terms of teleportation and so forth, that was held at the former Sweeney Auditorium in Santa Fe, New Mexico in June of 2003. So Jack's a real person, and he was aligned with the U.S. time-space program. The other reason I can affirm the existence of Montauk in general terms is because we were using the Montauk chair, as it later became known, to visit episodes in our own subjective future via magnetic transduction, beginning in the spring of 1970, as affirmed by the time travel technologist Dr. David Lewis Anderson on Coast to Coast AM in his 2002 appearance on that show.
So hold on, to bring people up to speed again, just so the audience isn't completely lost. At Camp Hero in Montauk, New York, upstate New York, the entire base is all underground. And at that time, they were using a device that they called the Montauk chair, that they would take psychic sensitives, people with certain abilities, strap them into the chair, and put them into some kind of quantum state, if you will, which then allowed them to amplify whatever that was to open a portal into, as I understand it, this just comes from the books by Peter Moon, to go further into the future, about 3000 AD or so, where they were focusing on a large horse, a statue of a horse, rearing up on its hind legs with a clock in its belly. And for whatever reason, they were using prepubescent boys or young boys right at puberty, because it had something to do with their electromagnetic fields not being particularly set, which means that they could send them into the future and then bring them back. Is that approximately accurate?
No, it's not. It's not at all. In fact, you're giving you're giving the folklore of Montauk, which has been propagated by sort of the Montauk subculture.
Well, by Peter Moon. That's all in his book.
Yeah, I know. All I can affirm is that Jack Pruitt, their research director, was previously involved in Pegasus, and that the chair existed. The only thing we were doing in the chair, and it involved, by the way, both boys and girls. So the whole sort of Montauk boy concept, I think, is coming from somewhere else. But what we were doing was we were being dissociated in a field of magnetic transduction that amplified our understanding of what our own subjective futures held. So, for example, as a 9-year-old, there in Morris Plains, New Jersey, at my elementary school, Mount View Road Elementary School, I was placed in the chair beginning in spring of '70, and I was doing things like going forward and having a 15 or 20-minute episode of practicing law here in Washington State, which I'm now doing. Now, what I think happened, just to kind of not discredit the Montauk account, because I believe while not wholly accurate, it is factual rather than fictional. So let me explain. I think what happened is they spun off the Montauk chair under the leadership of Jack Pruitt, because he had been one of the facilitators on Pegasus, to do everything and anything they could do with the chair. So, for example, one opportunity they had would have been to synthesize the Tesla teleporter and the Montauk chair, because the Montauk chair had when we were in it, it had two advantages. One is the body of the teleportee didn't go anywhere. Your body stayed back in the chair, but your mind went forward. Whereas when you were teleporting via other devices that allowed for physical displacement in time-space, you were physically at risk, which was a negative. The other advantage of the Montauk chair is I know they found, just with the group of kids that they were working with me, from 1970 for several years there, that they were getting highly accurate data. For example, I am a lawyer in Washington State, having grown up in New Jersey during those years without a single family member or ancestor or neighbor being a lawyer, nor anybody in my family living west of Philadelphia. Okay, so they were finding that the data that the children were providing of their own subjective futures was highly accurate. I mean, at one point I came up with the name, the physical appearance, and the ethnicity of one of my sister-in-laws. So we were literally citing people who would enter our lives later in time. So they knew that the Montauk chair, as it later became known, was a valuable time travel technology. So I think what happened is they spun it off into Project Montauk, put it under Pruitt, and then began doing everything that they could to the chair. For example, irradiate the environment that the chair and the child sitting in the chair was being subjected to see what would happen. And that would also explain why they just used boys in Project Montauk, because they would have needed a baseline if they really started to get into serious activities involving the chair. So I'm not discounting the account about Project Montauk, but these more kind of elaborate applications you're talking about, like putting it in the center of a nuclear explosion in Russia, the chair was staying back in the laboratory. And even synthesizing it with teleportation would have been quite difficult. But I do think they were probably doing everything they could. For example, administering an hallucinogen to the kid in the chair and then irradiating the room and then getting a report of what the child experienced. Because according to Nichols and Moon, in their series of books on Project Montauk, ultimately, as you say, they were able to travel to 3000 BC. Now, what do they find out there? They find a statue of a horse. Well, what was the DARPA program for which the Montauk account sort of post-empted when it came along in the early 80s, stating that basically Project Montauk began in 1983, when I had first teleported with my dad to New Mexico in 67, 68. Again, the motif of a horse, a la Project Pegasus, which we also find in J.J. Benitez's work in Spanish, Operation Trojan Horse. So I think what we have here is some meme management, But I can affirm or confirm that Project Montauk definitely existed.
Now your claim is that you have traveled both backwards and forwards in time, yes?
Correct, using different technologies.
Okay, so here's a really big question. The challenge becomes as to, and this is how I understand it, that time is very much like a wave, and I've used this explanation a number of times, that time is very much like a wave that's coming towards the beach. If you want to affect that wave, and some people think about changing or shifting time, you throw your body into the wave. You go at it, you throw your body into the wave, you make kind of a hole in it, but the wave continues forward and then hits the beach anyway. But the only way to maybe change time or change an event is to create an equal and opposite wave in consciousness, because time is an agreed upon reality, with the example being we go back in time and we kill Hitler. And does that actually change the time stream at all, or is it simply you can't destroy the pyramid by taking the capstone off the pyramid. We kill Hitler, and the next day it's Rudolf Hess that takes his place, or whomever, and now things are worse. So here's the ultimate question. Getting down to it, there's a lot of technicalities and a lot of things that you've talked about on other programs before. Can time be changed, and what is the process of doing that, if it's possible?
Okay, you can go back to what we call the past, and you can be the cause of things that have effects. But when you visit the past, this is essentially the kernel of truth that I keep on repeating on Project Pegasus on Facebook, because science fiction has confused the public about this phenomenon. Think about when you go back to the past. What is it there? What time is it in the past? It's the present. And that means that when you go back in time from your point of reference in the future, your present, you affect the past's present and you become a causal agent in the original event. So, for example, when I was sent to Gettysburg on November 19th of 1863, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to have the opportunity to see President Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, and I ended up being photographed in what's called the Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg, which was probably taken by Matthew Brady, because I saw the photographer as he was walking up a small stepladder taking the photograph. I was there the same day Lincoln was. I didn't go back to a second replaying of Gettysburg on November 19th of 1863 just because I was visiting there from the future. The sine qua non of time travel is to permeate the actual past or the actual future. So when I was sent there by plasma confinement by Dr. Sterling Colgate and my late father Raymond F. Basiago from a small time lab in East Hanover, New Jersey, I was sent back to the original event, and I was an original causal actor or factor in that location, that event scenario in the time-space continuum. So, for example, before I left New Jersey in 1972 to go back to 1863 and try to see President Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, I was already in the photograph that existed in my time and place, being there in 1863, because I had been. Why had I been? Because I time traveled there. So when we go back in the past, we have an effect on the past's present, not in a causal way, but in a retrocausal way.
So you're saying in essence, sorry to interrupt you, you're saying in essence that if we do go back and let's say stop the Kennedy assassination, we run in front of the car, say, look out, duck, he just lives. And we come back to a present where JFK was president and some crazy guy just ran out in front of his car and he missed an assassination attempt. And it simply becomes, in other words, no one would know that the past was any different because the present just continues. Is that what you're saying?
Not only would we come back to a present in which the story of 11/22/63 was that President Kennedy was saved from an assassination attempt, but we would have left such a present in which that was the past. Because when you intervene in the past, you can't change the past because it takes place during the past. All you can do is fulfill an event that is already evident. There's no duplication. There's no second timeline. The metaphor or whatever, an example of Schrodinger's cat is invalid because even the leading physicists aren't comprehending what you're doing when you're visiting the past. You're in the original event. And see, that sets up the conundrum. That sets up the paradox. If you wanted to go back and prevent, quote-unquote, the Kennedy assassination, you wouldn't have the data to do so unless you're acting on the story of him being saved from an assassination attempt on that dreadful day. Because if you intervened in the past, there wouldn't have been an assassination to be responding to in the future. There would have been a successful foiling of an assassination attempt that you would have been going back.
My guest this afternoon, Andrew D. Basiago. I'm so sorry. I said his name incorrectly. Andrew D. Basiago. I'm very sorry for pronouncing it.
You got it.
No, it's not the cheese. It's Basiago. So, Andrew, here we are. So we're having this fascinating conversation about time travel. I wrote a book, which was kind of a whistleblower book, all about this, called Sands of Time. In that version of it, the scientists were at Montauk. They were using this device called the Beast, again, to study time dilations in atomic explosions. Years later, part of the back engineering programs that were going on at 5-1 in Nevada, or more famously Area 51 in Nevada, had more to do with understanding the ability of the craft that they had there to time dilate and actually travel through time, if you will, rather than the propulsion systems on it. And is there and by the way, have they developed, part of the point of my Sands of Time book was they talking about how they were working on developing a time runner, and that the time runner is either a backpack or a man-portable device that then allows an individual to travel backwards in the time stream. Do we have such a thing?
Yes, and in fact, I was shown the operation of that device in 1971 in Old Town Albuquerque. My father was given a handheld chronovisor, and he and his longtime friend from Old Town Albuquerque, Mary Constance Chavez, and Connie Chavez, who's kind of a folkloric legend in Old Town Albuquerque. She's kind of the belle star of Old Town Albuquerque, having been born and in fact died in Albuquerque. My father had the device in his hand, and we began walking towards Old Town Albuquerque from several blocks outside the classic streetscape there. And he turned the device on, and we walked into Old Town Albuquerque in 1931. We even entered a saloon, and they had some beers, and I was served some soda. So there is a handheld chronovisor that, it's not a backpack, it's simply a little device like the ETs have been seen using. And you can literally change the quantum environment around you and walk into a previous time.
Now, we were talking about changing time, and again, time and space does exist as light and sound. Let's say we teleport
Right.
10,000 light years out. We look back on the Earth. We can see light and sound actually coming from the planet. The joke about extraterrestrials are just now getting I Love Lucy, and so they come to Earth. They think that Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz are our king and queen. And you were talking. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but they're watching old TV shows from way back in the 50s because they're just getting.
We've been broadcasting a lot of nonsense out into the cosmos, that's for sure.
But I think the only thing that keeps us alive is we are the most interesting reality show in the cosmos, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's say, and we're going to get into the future here because we're going to save the last half hour for things that are going to happen in the future. You talked about changing a personal timeline. You talked about going back into the past and shifting a timeline. Now, I understand, again, and I've explained this to people, I can't even tell you how many times, if we go back and save Kennedy, suddenly you would jump then forward where everybody knew that Kennedy was saved, and it would become part of our universal reality that a couple of crazy guys ran out and stopped Kennedy from being shot, and we would just, and that reality would move forward, and no one would know that time was changed except the people that actually changed the event. Is that correct?
It's actually more complex than that. And in fact, I refute the notion that you can go back and change literally the dispositive outcome of a past event. Because look,
because of mass consciousness?
No, before you left on that trip to go back and intervene in the saving of President Kennedy, you'd be living in a world in which that was the past, namely him surviving 11/22/63. So let me explain why this is so.
It's making my hair hurt now. Now I'm just like,
Okay. Now let me explain. Time is linear.
Yes.
And timelines exist within the quantum hologram.
Yes.
So if we're going to assume arguendo, we're talking about manipulating the timeline that we're on, past, present, and future, that vector. Okay, that set of event scenarios on the same vector. okay, timeline alpha, let's call it. If you go back on timeline alpha, the time in the past that influenced the point in time you are actually on, okay, you cannot change the past because, look, time is linear. That timeline is linear. But time travel can be conceptualized, whether it's to the past or future, can be conceptualized as a transept to that location on the line. So when you're there, let's say in the past, you're in the past's present. And you can't change that, the events going on there. You can only participate in them. And then they become the future. They become the past that you left when you were in the future. Okay, so for example, when I was sent to Gettysburg, I couldn't have gone there and assassinated President Lincoln. Because when I left East Hanover, New Jersey in spring of 1972 to go to Gettysburg in 1863, I left a future in which the past consisted of a past in which President Kennedy wasn't assassinated on November 15th of 1863. Instead, he gave the Gettysburg Address. Nor could I suddenly
Lincoln,
superimpose
you misspoke. You just said.
I meant President. Yeah, I meant President Abraham Lincoln. Okay. He wasn't assassinated on November 19th of 1863. He was shot on April 14th of 1865. Okay, so what I could do is I could walk into that scene and be photographed in the Josephine Cobb image and retrocausally complete the chain of causation that allowed that photograph to move forward in time so that it pre-existed in my present before I jumped back in time to participate in the event. But I couldn't have gone there and, flashed the bird at the photographer because I knew I was going to be photographed. I could only go back and fulfill the event as it originally happened.
And Andrew, you and I spoke about this when we met, and I did think it was interesting that this was last year at the UFO conference, and it was before the movie Lincoln came out, and it was very interesting because, and I will tell you exactly the conversation that you and I had when I asked, what was it like? What was Lincoln like? Did you meet him? Did you hear him? Did you hear, what arguably many say was one of the greatest speeches in American history? Again, not a big fan of Abraham Lincoln, but you said then that it was very interesting that Lincoln had a very shrill, high-pitched voice, that it was not the Royal Dano Disney, 7 years ago, that it was more of and that you said something about him having a throat disease or something wrong with his larynx, and it was actually a much higher pitch, like 7 years ago, our forefathers, which Daniel Day-Lewis in the movie, and let me just ask you this, because obviously Lincoln just came out just recently, before we had this conversation. Daniel Day-Lewis picked up on that and took that shriller, higher tone of Lincoln. And I just want to point out that you were the one that told me that before Daniel Day-Lewis came out and said Lincoln had this weird thing about his voice, and you said that a year ago before all this came out, which really impressed me.
Right. Now let me elaborate on what I know about Lincoln.
Okay.
I was sent to see him speak at Gettysburg, but the plasma confinement effect wore off when I was about 100 paces with my back to the dais shortly before he arrived on the stage, because when I left the front of the dais, he had not yet arrived. So we know that the Josephine Cobb image captures him probably right after waving to the crowd and sitting down before he spoke. But my late father, Raymond, who also was there that day, having been sent from an earlier day in real time, so that when I ran into my dad in the front of the stage, he looked younger to me, but I looked older to him, because I was sent on a later day in real time back in New Jersey in the 1970s. My dad later described what Lincoln sounded like. He had a pinched, rural, accented voice. It was sort of like, according to my father,
a pinch. We lost you for a second there.
And 7 years ago, it was like a pinched voice. And my dad described this before doctors confirmed. This is one of the proofs of that my dad and I actually went to the Gettysburg Address.
Okay.
My dad described to me in 1972, because I had missed seeing Lincoln, but he had seen the whole, and stood at Lincoln's feet right there in the front of the dais as he delivered the Gettysburg Address. And I said, what was he like? And he just said, a man with a beard giving a speech. And I said, well, anything special? And my dad said, yeah, I couldn't believe how high-pitched and rural his voice sounded. It was truly folksy. It was like 7 years ago. Now, it was after that fact that we learned that he had Marfan syndrome. And Marfan syndrome can elongate the voice box So that person literally has a pitched, high-pitched, even squeaky voice. The other thing I can say about Lincoln is I did see him twice when I was sent via Chronovision, another time travel technology, a year earlier in 1971 from New Mexico, from the chronovisor that once existed at the Cerrillos Cultural Center site in rural New Mexico. And what I can say is that by 1865, President Lincoln was emaciated. He was either not eating during the Civil War, or he was dying of a terminal disease like cancer, because he was literally skeletonous in his suit. The Lincolns walked past me in the lobby, and Mrs. Lincoln was still quite plump, but President Lincoln didn't even look 6'4". He looked about 5'10". He was that stoop-shouldered and emaciated by 1865. I think you see it in that last photograph. Abraham Lincoln was dying when he was shot, either of anorexia because of the stress of being president during the Civil War, or because of some terminal disease. It may have been cancer. So what I want to address the movie, too. The movie I believe, is a classic. And I believe that Daniel Day-Lewis's performance is one of the most historically fascinating. There were two scenes in that movie that make me believe that it's possible that the U.S. government passed real images of Lincoln's life on to Spielberg and the acting troupe in that film. There were two moments in the film that I thought were utterly believable and novel at the same time. One was the hand gestures that Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln used when he was arguing with Mrs. Lincoln, when she was on the ground. You know, Sally Field was on the floor of one of the rooms of the White House, and he was making all these mad gestures with his hands. The other scene was where he was arguing about the 13th Amendment with several of his cabinet officials at his desk, and he pointed in three directions going, no, no, no. You know, we're not going to miss this opportunity to make slavery illegal. They were so realistic as scenes, and he had so much of the bearing and the unique appearance of Abraham Lincoln, just in the way he was personifying Lincoln as an actor, that I suspect that the government passed along chronovised footage of Lincoln in order to inform Daniel Day-Lewis's performance.
Were there any other events in history that you've not just chronovised, but did they send you to any other points in time and space? I mean, some people would ask, how about the crucifixion? How about
right?
How about Jesus? How about there's a turning point in history. Anything on that?
Yeah, they were training us to be chrononauts, the first cadre of adult chrononauts that had been trained from childhood. So most of the locations I was being sent to were mundane points in time and space where they believed that adults that we would encounter would be kind to us and help us if, for example, we got stranded in time. Right. But I was sent to several illustrious events. In addition to Gettysburg, I was sent to the Lincoln assassination site, and I was also sent and given a script to memorize to go to General Washington's encampment, literally his tent, above New York Harbor in August of 1776, advise him to retreat from New York Harbor. So I had the cosmic privilege of literally meeting and interacting with General Washington during his life. Huh. And he was a study in opposites. He was both very regal and commanding in his presence, sort of radiant with life, but he was also very kind of jocular and relaxed. And that was incredible. I've often said that if there was one place, again, that I could go back in time, it would be to meet Washington again and spend more time with him. He was literally an impeccable individual who clearly seemed larger than life, so I could see why he had the great destiny that he did. But most of the places I was sent were, they sent us to 100 million BC via Chronovision to look at some non-carnivorous dinosaurs in a kind of a prehistoric, Arizona-type setting. They sent me to Holland around 1800. They sent me to the Five Points neighborhood in New York City around 1905. So they're pretty much just getting us accustomed to being chronovised to past locations and then jumping back and forth across the country between New Jersey and New Mexico for short periods of time during the existence of teleportation. So we wouldn't be bodily stranded in time-space. Because that was the conundrum they were dealing with, was if they teleported us to the time before the existence of teleporters, we would have been stranded in time.
Now, I did think it was interesting because I've had some other conversations. Bernie, who's called in the show, and talking about how they were doing a lot of this in El Segundo. And there's a building as you just come out of the tunnel, on moving south on Sepulveda or Pacific Coast Highway through just past LAX. And it's got 3 big 9s on the building. I mean, they're big, giant red 9s. These 9s have got to be 20 feet high, these giant 9s on the building. Right. And Bernie was saying that you would jump out of the building, and then when you would come jumping back in, that the 3 9s looked like 666s. Did you have anything of that experience?
Yeah, I jumped.
Bernie Mendez is what I'm talking about.
Right. Bernie Mendez was the Defense Department's investigator of the CIA's Mars jump room program of the early 1980s, and he was one of my fellow trainees and fellow U.S. chrononauts who were jumping to Mars or whatever planetary domain they were indeed sending us to. They believed it was Mars in real time, but Bernie and I have established some of the facts that indicate, for example, that it might have been that we weren't teleporting to Mars in the jump room, but being chronovized to the actual Mars.
Yeah, because my biggest question about teleportation, I mean, the people that I've talked to as far as teleportation and going back to Tesla's technology of not only, and is there any accuracy to not only Tesla opening fields using electromagnetics to be able to teleport from place to place, but that also that he was, and this was in the movie, I'm not sure if it was called The Prestige or not, where he was duplicating things, and things were showing up that he was actually sending things through, and duplicates were showing up in a field. I don't know if that was just a movie.
That was in The Prestige. I don't know if it was real or not, but I'm validating that for you.
With Hugh Jackman and Batman.
Christian Bale.
Christian Bale, yes.
Again, that was the use of film and television to propagate science fiction works that basically present the basic concept, but denature it and inoculate the public from the truth. Basically,
okay. So it's nonsense. So then, let me ask my question. Then my question becomes because as I understand it, in my viewing of the future, they do have the teleportation, and this was back in '94 when I did a kind of a time-space transference to more along a meditation thing where if you can have access to previous existences, let's see if you can access future existences. They do have a global teleportation network. The challenge becomes is that if you're jumping to the moon or you're jumping to Mars, that I mean, obviously, if the mathematics of it are, again, like hitting a bullet with another bullet. You've got Earth rotating at about 8,000 miles an hour that then is moving 17,000 miles an hour around the sun, with Mars rotating about the same, about 7,500 miles an hour, and with it moving, at approximately 17,000 miles an hour on the sun. And again, so we've got us. Again, if I could just jump up and remain static in space, I would literally, the Earth would leave me behind. It would be like jumping out of a boat. And I understood that you could teleport on Earth because there was a morphogenic field of the consciousness of Earth. But the minute you start jumping to the moon and Mars and other places, suddenly you start running into those, those crazily insane rotations and movements of the universe. And I know that this is maybe far too complex a question to answer here, but you want to give it a crack?
Yeah, it's a complex phenomenon. But let me affirm the fact that bodily teleportation through a vortal tunnel in time-space emerged by 1967-68 because I did so as the first American child to teleport when I jumped through a Tesla device at the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company facility to Santa Fe with my late father to then drive to the Los Alamos labs to meet with Dr. Harold M. Agnew, one of the Manhattan Project physicists, when he was the director of the weapons division, the W division at Lanell. And no prestige or anything was left behind at the teleport. We went through a tunnel in time-space and popped out the other side in a couple of seconds. Now, the mystery doesn't surround Tesla teleportation because that had been reduced to practice by that 1967-68 time frame because Dr. Agnew asked my father, and we both answered 6 regarding what age I was at that time. So Tesla teleportation had been reduced to practice on Earth by 1967-68.
And one wonderful thing that somebody sent me was a Johnny Depp movie, actually. There are only 4 questions of value in life, Don Octavio. What is sacred? Of what is the spirit made? What is worth living for? And what is worth dying for? And the answer to each of those questions is only love. So there you go. It is the power of love. And The Power of Love and the Power of Time Travel, of course, that's from, Back to the Future. Andrew Basiago is with us. And Andrew, we've talked about changing our own lives. And we got off on it a little bit, and we sort of got interrupted by various technical things going on. What's the possibility of, again, what is the grandfather paradox? Can you, in fact, go back in time? And, I can't forget also, don't forget the funding for the station that lets this show be on the air is all from listener support of Revolution Radio. You can take a look at revolution-radio.com, revolutiontalkradio.com, and freedomslips.com. There's always a donation button. Remember, we do this for free. Nobody's getting paid. We have some sponsors that actually help out the radio hosts themselves, but Nighthawk is doing a fantastic job. Steve Travesty, my partner in crime here, we're all doing this for nothing, by the way. I mean, we're doing this for free. And so please, 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 we are the #1 listener-supported radio station on the Internet. This program is constantly in the top 5, usually sitting at #2 on TalkStream Live. That is huge for an Internet station. Our reach is boundless, literally, going all over the world to millions of people. And we can't do it without your help and your support. So, once again, back to Andrew Basiago. How can you change your own life? Can you go back in time, interact with yourself, and not have a grandfather paradox in changing your own life? And answer that question, then we've got to talk about the future. Go.
Okay. You can go back in time, and you can do so with a collateral awareness of a particular event. So, for example, let's say when you were 20 years old, you were in a car accident at Hollywood and Vine in Los Angeles. Well, okay, when you went back in time, first of all, you can't become yourself in the past. When you go back in time when you're older, you don't suddenly transmogrify into your younger self. If you go to the place, however, where an event occurred, like let's say that car accident at Hollywood and Vine when you were 20, if you go there when you're 40, you visit your 20-year-old self as your 40-year-old self.
Right, okay, that's in most of the movies.
Okay,
that's
okay.
A Back to the Future kind of reality.
Right.
Okay, so.
Right, okay. Now, if you're prompted to make that trip to the past by the accident that occurred, it means that when you went back in time later as a 40-year-old, you weren't successful at stopping the accident. Okay? Because otherwise you wouldn't know about the accident. In a similar way, if you exist to either contemplate or to literally jump back in time, to time travel, back to the life of your grandfather or your father to try to basically intermit your mother's pregnancy and prevent your existence. If you exist to make that attempt, indeed to even contemplate making that attempt, you can't be successful in doing so every time you try. So, for example, you can make multiple attempts to go back and meet your grandfather at some location that he was at, let's say where he was employed when he was 20 years old. But you can't succeed at preventing your grandfather from siring your father or mother, because if you did, you wouldn't exist, okay? So the attempt is asymptotic to the event threshold. So again, this is the principle that if an event exists that you can know about, let's say the assassination of President Kennedy, you can make as many attempts as you would want to prevent that event, but if you know about that event, it means it's embedded in the time-space continuum. And while you can travel to that location, you can't.
You're so making my hair hurt here. So my philosophy of this entire thing is, again, time cannot be changed because time is an agreed-upon construct of the mass of reality. And the only way you can do it is maybe take 1 million people back in time, show them that Hitler's a bad guy, or show them that it would probably be a bad thing for Kennedy to be assassinated, and those 1 million people could then quite conceivably effectuate a consciousness change of the timeline, which is a lot why prophecy works. You can have a prophet say there's going to be this earthquake at this time, it happens, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, and enough people then know about it. You then say this earthquake's going to happen at this time, California's going to fall into the ocean, and nothing happens because it's now inundated the consciousness. Would that be fairly accurate?
No, essentially it's just based on the nature of causation. The fact that causation goes forward with specific effects on a linear basis, so that when you go back in time on a nonlinear basis to affect that event scenario, you're in the original event scenario. So whatever ended up happening that history knows about is what you participated in creating. In that sense, that's why I say I kind of like almost as a matter of dogma, you can't change the past, you can only fulfill it.
All right, let's talk about the future.
Okay.
Talk about the future. Everybody's freaked out between now and let's just say 2016. We're in a 13-year cycle between now and called the Night of the Jaguar by the Maya. Between now and 2025, Pluto finally moves into Aquarius. 2025. My visions have been the possibility of a war with Red China, an invasion of the United States, a destruction of the American Union. Certainly, we're projecting economic collapse and chaos, a deficit of $20 trillion. Lay it on me. Give me the future from now until whenever it is you saw it until.
You
got 20 minutes to just go. Just go.
We can visit the future through time travel, bodily go there, physically go there, and have effects. We can also retrieve remote images, holographic images of future events via the technology called chronovision. We've been doing it since the early 70s. But again, the grandfather's paradox works forward in time via proto-causation, which is to say that if we were to see, for example, evidence of a war with China through our chronovision, it must either be an event that we don't prevent because we see it in the chronovisor, or if it doesn't appear there, it means we've taken real-time action to prevent it. The other paradox about acting in the present via a future event is that causation itself is disrupted. Let me explain that. When you look forward in time and see the identity of a future president, chronovise, let's say, who's being sworn in on January 20th, 2016, it's a specific person who's reciting their name to the Chief Justice when they're taking the oath of office as president. If you then, based on that data, let's say, join the election team, the campaign team, to get that specific person elected president, that causes causation to break off, because you then have to ask, did the fact that that person being elected president cause you to work to get that person elected president, or did your decision to get that person elected contribute to them being elected?
Okay,
and
Andrew, go. All right.
Okay.
Complete your thought.
Right, and in fact, so essentially what happens is you get the problem of the snake eating its tail. In fact, both effects are the cause of the opposite, and both causes are the effect of the opposite. And
okay,
that's when you're getting circular causation.
All right, so this is Dancing with the Stars. These are all explanations of this and that and the other thing. What happens? Come on, what have you seen? It doesn't matter if it happens or not.
Okay, I see
what have you seen happening? Give me some events.
Okay,
what happens?
Very little of my time on Project Pegasus was dedicated to sending me forward in time. But let me share with you what I was directly involved in, and then what hasn't already happened that I was
even chronovisoring the future, even looking at images of the future.
The United States Defense Department was chronovising images of the future by 1970.
Okay, they must have come up with some information. It seems like everybody's saying that they were terrified of stuff. Everybody was saying they were terrified of things happening after 2012, and yet nothing's happened so far. It's been a pretty nice day. What's already
happened, what's already eventuated that they knew about was 9/11, the advent of the Internet, the emergence of AIDS as an epidemic disease, the emergence of widespread cell phone use because they saw people walking around with these little walkie-talkies all over the streetscapes and so forth when they chronovised major city streets.
Okay.
And they knew the identities that I know of. They knew the identities of Presidents Carter, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. I was even present in New Mexico when both Presidents Bush and then in a later lunch, Bill Clinton had just been apprised of their future presidencies. When we were serving in the jump room together, Stanley Ann Dunham, the mother of President Obama, was openly talking about his presidency, and my father and Brett Stillings' father were openly talking about my presidency. So one of the things that I can predict is going to happen, not necessarily in 2016 when I run, but sometime during my lifetime, is that I will be elected president of the United States. Okay. I'm taking the opposite position on that issue of state secrecy than President Obama has. What I'm doing is I'm running as the truth candidate. So I'm revealing to the American people that the U.S. government has achieved access to past and future events, that the CIA has been identifying and grooming future presidents. Now, some of the specific things that I saw when I went forward in time, which was very little of my time traveling. Most of my time traveling was to the past on Pegasus. But there were two conspicuous journeys to the future. One was an advanced chronovisor probe that was held on November 5th of 1971 at ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey. And during that very harrowing probe, where we were actually wearing specialized time-space, jumpsuits, complete with a respirator and a communications device, we were sent forward in time to view the U.S. Supreme Court building in the year 2013, which is indeed this year. And I reported, when I was debriefed by a lieutenant commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence, that the Supreme Court building was under about 100 feet of brackish water. So the probe there was like diving on the Supreme Court building as a marine artifact. That hasn't happened yet.
So Washington, D.C. gets completely submerged.
No,
wow. Hooray! That's good news.
Yeah, I know you would enjoy that, but no. On a major timeline that happens, but I'm not predicting that will happen in 2013 on this timeline, because previously, in the summer of 71, I was present at the meeting that was held at the Sandia Auditorium right after they locked the door to the public. And there was a presentation by some of the senior officials of DARPA's Project Pegasus, and they announced that they were shutting down time travel to the past via chronovisor again, because every time they sent the same child or another child to the same quote-unquote past event, it changed a little bit. So we can't take that chronovisor probe to 2013 as condign evidence of what's going to happen on 2013, except on one major timeline. It may or may not happen on our timeline. The other forward data that I know is that humanity survives at least to 2045 without a major disruption of civilization, because I was being sent to 2045 to retrieve microfilm summaries of events occurring between the mid-1970s and the mid-2040s. And that was teleportation. Teleportation was more reliable because it involves displacement on the same timeline. And we were jumping back through the building there and arriving in southern Colorado and then being bused back to northern New Mexico. And so I can say that a functional civilization exists in 25.
Okay, so we've got a functional, so here's the list. Functional civilization in 2045.
Mm-hmm.
Washington, D.C. under 100 feet of water in 2013, from your lips to God's ears.
Right.
Let's hope that happens. You as President of the United States in 2016.
No, I'm running in 2016, and I can say that in 1980,
yes,
individual citizens aligned with the CIA were in possession of that intelligence data that I should get psychologically prepared for the presidency, because I would one day hold that office, not necessarily in 2016.
Anything else we could, Bitcoins or price of gold or the stock market, or whether or not the government, the United States government is looking at insolvency possibly. There's a lot of people worried about a new world order and the Bilderbergers and all that, and a financial collapse. Cliff High talks about the Great Silence this year, which was supposed to happen, I guess, with major earthquakes on March 23rd. Those also came and went. It just seems to me like everything, and I've done this from a psychic standpoint with a group of people, that we start viewing these major events and someone just puts a big stick in the wheel, and it's almost like things reset, almost as if it's a video game where they press a button and you go back to a saved point in time to give it another shot.
Yeah, one thing we should watch closely, and something I'm very disturbed about, that does relate to what we were sort of warned about of the future, is the emergence of a police state in the United States and the federalization of that police state under the last two presidents. And the reason I bring up that issue is not only is it upon us, not only are we now living in a police state, and not only was the National Defense Authorization Act a travesty of our republic, that President Obama should be ashamed of describing that as the change that we were waiting for, the police state, in his announcement about supporting the NDA and its passage from that famous East Room appearance that he made with Vice President Biden.
Yeah, here's the change we're waiting for, which means that the military can arrest you on the street. Oh, and by the way, I have robots who can kill you from the sky. That's the change we're waiting for. Isn't that nice that Skynet has now finally become a reality? And isn't it interesting that Joe Morton in the movie was a black man who then creates Skynet? And isn't it interesting we have Barack Obama now creating Skynet?
Well, the reason I cite it in this part of our discussion is because we had several days of counterinsurgency training of how to do things like blow up dams and hydroelectric power plants and water facilities. So the CIA people that were working with us in Project Pegasus clearly were concerned that a totalitarian would at some point emerge in the United States.
Well, it also doesn't help that our military in Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever we are in the world no longer actually fights militaries. We fight civilians. Now it's all urban warfare. It's we fight and kill women and children mostly, and street to street. And I keep telling people that those troops are being prepared to return to the United States and use it all on us. Is there a revolt? Is there a revolution? Is there a war between the states that you see coming?
I don't see a war between the states, but I was briefed by Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, not only about the fact that he confirmed my dad's statement that would one day be president, but he basically advised me to get ready to run in 2015 because there will be a mass disaffection of the people of the United States from their government by 2015. So I would frame that as a prediction. What Courtney described was a large payola scandal where roughly 300 members of Congress were found to be CIA agents with Swiss bank accounts. So that may be the way that finally the fury of the American people at the emergence of a police state in our republic. Sean, over 1 million Americans from Bunker Hill to Baghdad have given their lives in America's wars. And I did a little calculation, and I found that if you could lay the bodies shoulder to shoulder, not foot to head, but simply lay them on the ground shoulder to shoulder, those dead American patriots would stretch from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And this government and the last previous presidency had the audacity to implement a police state in our republic. So, yes, I can predict that by 2015, the American people will simply be saying to the existing government, either sit up and shut down, either sit down and shut up, or we're taking our government back initially by a ballot, but by bullet if we need to. So the people are going to be extremely angry to the point of armed revolution by 2015. And I think those of us in the truth movement, like Governor Ventura and myself, we may find our countrymen turning to us for leadership. For example, in a Ventura Basiago ticket, independent ticket in 2016, we better get ready because clearly the American people are going to be in motion towards armed rebellion as the election of 2016 nears.
Well, here's my other question, and this is a hypothesis that I have, which I will put to you to confirm or deny or agree and disagree. That there seem to be two levels operating right now, that you have an autocratic level and a technocratic level. Everything that I've seen, from Area 51 to the Dulce Mesa to Edwards Air Force Base to the journals that I received that became my book, Sands of Time, from people out there, is that you have a technocratic level of bureaucracy or government that really doesn't care what the civilian government is doing. As far as they're concerned, they can play their little games, they can do their economics, they can do whatever. It's our job to make sure that clowns like you can stand out in front of the store and wave at the crowd. You then have an autocratic level that seems to be the Rothschilds, Bilderbergers, New World Order gang that, are building us the cages and the prisons, and the only debate between the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers is the Rockefellers just want to kill us all and basically beat us with sticks and dogs and guns to round us up into the prison, and the Rothschilds will lure us there with a blanket and a pillow with some kind of health care, pretending to take care of the sheep right up until they don't. So they're just, and again, really, that's the Republicans and the Democrats. It's social and or fascist party A and party B. The Democrats will take you to hell in a handbasket. The Republicans will take you there in a shopping cart. But hell is the ultimate destination. So my question becomes, is that you have technocrats that seem to have technology that is light years beyond, is a Star Wars, Star Trek reality. And then you have autocrats sort of, rolling around the mud down here. And the technocrats don't seem to care. I guess would you agree or disagree with that? And as we're closing up, because we only got about 3 minutes left here, the question becomes, you have these people with all this technology. Why aren't they interceding? Why aren't they doing, we've got about 3 minutes here, but why aren't they doing something about it?
Well, I view it somewhat differently. I view the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats sort of as the money party and the socialist party. So the Republicans want to take your house away, your home away, and the Democrats want to take your away. So what I think I don't think we can go deeper politically with the Rothschilds and all that and the technocracy. Clearly, a technological elite consisting of leading scientists and so forth, and also major oligarchs, your Henry Kissinger, certainly informs the Council on Foreign Relations, which then advises the intelligence community what to do, and then the intelligence community implements through the military. That will break down if there's, for example, a scandal showing that many of the governors around the country and members of Congress are literally domestic CIA agents, for example. That's what Hunt was describing. So what I think will happen will be, and what I think could be the saving grace, is that charismatic presidential leadership at this time of great crisis will ultimately cause most military and police officials